Hi, I'm Jason Sanders, and today I'm going to show you a basic example using Autogen. And if you're not familiar with Autogen, it's a framework developed by Microsoft in which you can actually have agents interact with each other to answer questions that you might have or solve some problems, create some code, things like that. Now, today I'm going to just do a really basic example to show you, to get you started, to show you how it works. And I'm just simply going to have an agent, or I'm going to ask an agent to get me the current price of Bitcoin. So with that, let me hide my head here and go over to Visual Studio Code. And what I've done here is I've created a Jupyter notebook that contains the Python code that I'm going to run. And basically, the first thing that you need to do is create a virtual environment within the Visual Studio Code, virtual Python environment, and install something called Autogen. So, in other words, once you've created your virtual environment, you should see something like this, which has .venv, and then you'll just type in pip install Autogen. Autogen. Now I've already installed mine, so I'm not going to do it again, but that's it. It's very simple. That's the only installation that you'll need for this particular coding example. And this first code block here in my Jupyter notebook within Visual Studio Code example is basically where I'm setting the OpenAI API key, which I'll need. So this particular example is going to ping the OpenAI API to get the current price of Bitcoin. Now, Autogen does allow, I'm not going to go through it in this particular example, but Autogen does allow you to use LLMs other than OpenAI. For example, you can download and run an LLM locally on your own computer, and you could do the same exercise without having to ping OpenAI. Now, this second bit of code here is where I'm importing Autogen, and I'm creating something called a config list. And the config list is basically just setting the model, the OpenAI model that I want to use for this exercise. And it's going to be GPT 3.5 Turbo -1106. Now I'm selecting this one because it's cheaper than the 4 models, and this particular exercise or code that I'm going to be running doesn't need, it's a pretty basic request just to get the current price of Bitcoin. So I don't need the GPT-4, which is more expensive. So 3.5 Turbo is a great option if you want to be cost conscious, because one of the things that I have found in working with Autogen is that it can get a little pricey if you once you start doing complicated or multiple agent interactions. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, after specifying the model that I want to use, the next code block here basically is where I create an assistant agent. And to do that, it's very easy. You just type assistant equals. Now, this assistant, you could name anything. It doesn't matter. I just am calling it assistant here. Assistant equals autogen.assistant agent. And basically, you just need to name it. So I'm just naming it very simply assistant. And then I'm setting the LLM configuration. And seed at 42 is basically what that means is I'm creating a cache of the information that I'm going to be retrieving from the LLM. So the reason that might be helpful is if you are going to be testing or running the same query multiple times, and you don't want to ping the OpenAI API every time, you can pull on the cache. It'll just basically save you some money. I'm actually going to delete this because I ran that earlier when I was testing this. I'm going to delete that too. Okay. Then configuration list is the configuration list. I'm basically passing in the model that I want to use. And then temperature equals 0. Temperature, if you're not familiar with that term, is basically where you can set the creativity level of the LLM. And in this case, in this example, I'm going to be retrieving the price of Bitcoin, and I don't want, the LLM doesn't need to be creative for that. You might set it higher to like 0.5 or 0.7 or 1. If you want to get much more creative, like you're wanting the LLM to create you some advertising copy or write some poetry or something like that. Okay, so once the assistant agent is created, I'm going to create another agent. And these agents, and that's one of the beauties of Autogen, is you can have these agents interact with each other, which we'll see coming up shortly. But I'm going to create a proxy agent, and the proxy agent is basically the stand-in for me. So, and again, you'll see how that works. So I will send a message to the proxy agent, who will then interact with the assistant agent. So to do that, you just name it user proxy equals autogen.user proxy agent, name user proxy, system message, a human admin. Human input mode is terminate. So basically what that means is once the question is answered or the problem is solved, it'll end with terminate. That's what this code down here means. And then once terminate once it's ended with terminate, then again, you'll see when I run through this example, then I'm able to send a message, a follow-up question maybe, or, maybe I'm okay with the answer that the user proxy gave me, so I might end the interaction. But this is the opportunity where you can follow up or end the interaction with the user proxy. And then code execution configuration. This basically sets so for example, if you're going to ask the assistant agent to write some code for you, then that code can be stored in a file called coding. In this example, I'm not going to ask for that, but that's what this bit of code here means. And then use Docker is false. I don't want the program to try to access Docker because I don't have that set up at the moment on my machine. Okay, so finally, once you've got your assistant and the user proxy, you can initiate the chat. And just as a quick aside, you can see the power of this because I could create multiple assistants. I could create a coder assistant who's an expert at writing Python code. And I could create an analyst assistant who's an expert at analyzing data, and have them work together to answer a question maybe on some data that I provide. That I can do in a later video, but I'm not going to go through that now. That's a little bit more advanced and complicated. So here we are at the end, the last piece of code here. And to initiate the chat, it's very easy. You just write or type in user proxy.initiate chat. Assistant is the entity that I want the user proxy to start the chat with. And message is the question that I have. And the question that I have is, what is the current price of Bitcoin? So with that brief explanation of the code, let's run it. I'm going to set the API key environment and variable. or bring in my API key. I'm going to import Autogen and bring in the configuration list of the model that I want to use. I'm going to create the assistant agent. Now I'm going to create the user proxy agent. And now I'm going to initiate the question. I'm going to start the interaction between the user proxy and the assistant. So you can see here, the user proxy to the assistant agent is asking, what is the current price of Bitcoin? And the assistant responds to the user proxy that it's going to use this CoinDesk API to fetch the current price of Bitcoin. So it's going to fetch the current price of Bitcoin from an API, and that API is CoinDesk API. And it's executing and executing, and it made an error, which it's recognized, and so it's fixing. So that's one of the interesting things is sometimes you'll see it'll create an error in its code, and then it, for example, in this case, it says that the assistant says I forgot to include the variable assignment in the previous code. So it picks up that it makes a mistake and it fixes it automatically. So I don't have to do that. I don't have to go in and check the code and then manually fix it. It is able to do it itself, and then runs the code and is able to get the current price of Bitcoin, which is 36,996, which then it says, it announces the current price of Bitcoin is 36,996. Is there anything else that you would like to know or do? And then we see the terminate here. And this is the opportunity where I can send in an additional request to the assistant, or I can exit if I'm wanting to stop the conversation. So in essence, the user proxy and the assistant interacted with each other to retrieve the current Bitcoin price via the CoinDesk API and gave me the response here of the current price. So that's pretty impressive. That's just a basic example that I wanted to show of how you can have two agents interact with each other and retrieve the current price of Bitcoin. So that's it. I hope this was helpful. Again, this was just a basic example of what you can do with Autogen, and it's just scratching the surface. You can do a lot of potential interactions with multi-agents. You can have them write code. You can have them analyze data, lots of things like that. So again, I hope this was helpful, and I will see you soon.